You ever get that sudden chill, the kind that crawls up your neck even though you're miles away from home? That's exactly what hit me the moment my phone buzzed inside the feed store. It was 3:17 in the afternoon. The air outside smelled like dry hay and diesel, sunlight filtering through dusty glass windows. I had just loaded a 50-pound sack of grain onto the cart, Rex's supplement, the one I only buy once a month. My boots were still caked with mud from morning chores, dust clinging to the cuffs of my jeans. Nothing unusual, just another Thursday, until that alert came through. Motion detected in kitchen area. At first I thought maybe a curtain had blown loose or the old screen door had swung open in the wind. The farm's full of creaks and groans. You learn to ignore most of them. But when I tapped the feed, my throat went dry, because it wasn't the wind. It was Lydia Pierce. There she was, stomping through my kitchen like she owned the place, heels clicking against the hardwood, her voice echoing like some fake authority drill. "Open this door right now," she barked at no one in particular, slamming drawers, rifling through cabinets. My cabinets. You know that gut punch feeling when you realize someone has crossed a line you never thought they'd dare. That's what settled in my chest. Because I was 12 miles away, stuck behind bags of fertilizer and a half-dead credit card reader, and she was inside my house. The camera angle shifted as Rex's collar cam activated. My partner was already in position. His breathing steady, ears forward, body low, military discipline in every move. He didn't bark, didn't lunge, he just watched. Silent, controlled. That's the difference between a dog and a working partner. And I'll ask you straight. What would you have done if your HOA president was in your kitchen, screaming like she had some kind of badge, while your trained K9 unit stood between her and the exit? I didn't even notice the clerk calling out behind me to ask if I needed help with the grain. My eyes were glued to the feed. Rex was already running his own playbook. His training told him this was a containment scenario, not a fight. He planted himself by the counter, cutting off her path to the back door. His whole posture said one thing: "You're not leaving until my handler arrives." Lydia froze when the speaker crackled. I'd triggered the system remotely. "K9 unit is recording everything." My voice filled the kitchen, cold and sharp, even though I was 15 minutes out on a backcountry road. Her head whipped around. That startled look on her face, I'll never forget it, like a burglar caught in the act, but worse. She hadn't expected surveillance. She hadn't expected Rex. She stammered something about emergency agricultural inspection, said it with the kind of fake authority tone people use when they've been believed all their lives. The thing is, Rex doesn't give a damn about tone. He doesn't respond to bluffing or badges or that smug way she held herself. He responds to behavior, and her behavior screamed threat. She tried the door, locked, tried the window latch, no good. Everywhere she turned, Rex adjusted, cutting off escape angles with quiet precision. The camera caught it all, every micro-expression, every twitch of panic as her usual tricks collapsed around her. And outside, the neighbors were starting to notice. Maggie Walsh from across the fence line heard the commotion. I saw her phone light flicker through the porch window as she started recording. Her shaky whisper made it onto the feed. "Oh my God, Lydia's in his house." That was it, the evidence was sealed. Not just my cameras, not just Rex, but the neighbors too. By the time I pulled out of the gravel lot, tires crunching, the sheriff's radio had already lit up. Someone, maybe Maggie, maybe another neighbor, had called it in. Sheriff Diaz's voice came over the line, calm as ever. "K9 unit has situation contained." Those words carry weight out here. Everyone in the county knows what a trained military dog can do when properly deployed. And Lydia, she was learning it firsthand. The miles between me and home never felt longer. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to ache. Dust trailed behind the truck like smoke. Every minute my mind raced with questions. Would Rex hold? Would she try to hurt him? What kind of person even does this? But Rex didn't need me to worry. On the feed, I watched as Lydia's tone shifted. First, it was the fake authority. "This is an inspection under code section." Then came the patronizing friendliness. "Good boy, nice doggy," like she thought Rex would roll over for a pat on the head. He didn't even blink. His discipline is something most humans can't even fake. And that's when the crack showed. She sat down hard on a chair, breathing uneven, her eyes darting from the camera to the locked door to Rex's steady frame. For the first time, I saw it, fear on Lydia Pierce's face. The kind that comes when you realize the game you've been playing isn't a game anymore. And I'll be honest with you. As I hit the gravel road back to my farm, heart-hammering, I thought one thing. She thought she could walk into my house uninvited. She thought her fake titles and loud voice would get her what she wanted. But she hadn't counted on Rex. And that mistake was about to cost her everything. You ever notice how 15 minutes can feel like an entire lifetime? That's what the drive back felt like. Every bend in the road, every shadow cutting across the cracked asphalt, stretched longer than it should have. My knuckles were white on the wheel, the truck rattling with every pothole. The feed store dust still clung to my sleeves, but my mind was back in that kitchen, with Rex standing guard and Lydia packing like a trapped fox. By the time my gravel driveway came into view, I could already see the cluster of neighbors. Maggie Walsh was front and center, her phone raised high, the screen glowing like a spotlight. A handful of others lingered behind her, whispering, shifting awkwardly. That's the thing about small towns, word travels faster than cell service. I killed the engine and stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel. The air smelled faintly of diesel and dry leaves. Sheriff Diaz's cruiser was already parked crooked near the fence, the headlights throwing sharp beams across my front porch. Inside the house, through the wide kitchen window, Rex was a statue, steady, calm, ears forward. And Lydia, she was sitting at my table, hands clenched, trying to look collected but failing miserably. Diaz met me halfway up the drive, his broad shoulders casting a shadow that seemed to anchor the chaos. He was ex-military himself, the kind of man who didn't waste words. "Situation contained," he said flatly, though his eyes flicked toward the kitchen where Rex hadn't moved an inch. "Stand down," I called, my voice sharp, the command Rex had waited for. Only then did his posture shift, easing back a fraction, though he stayed near the door, still watchful, still ready. That's discipline. That's years of training drilled into his bones. Diaz nodded once. "Your partner did good." I stepped into the kitchen, the floor creaking beneath my boots. Lydia's eyes snapped up wide, her face pale under the fluorescent light. The chair she sat in wobbled slightly as she tried to square her shoulders, that old smugness creeping back. "This was an emergency agricultural inspection," she said, louder than necessary, as if volume alone could fill the cracks in her story. I didn't answer right away. Just let the silence stretch, let the weight of the camera on Rex's collar keep recording every second. The neighbors outside murmured, their voices muffled through the walls. Diaz pulled out his tablet, scrolling through the footage already uploaded to secure servers. Frame by frame, the truth unfolded: Lydia's forced authority, Rex's perfect containment, her failed attempts at bluffing. It was textbook. No aggression from Rex, no threats, just calm control. And then Diaz laid it out. "Ma'am, you entered private property without authorization, claimed an emergency authority that doesn't exist in this county. And you were detained, not by force, but by a lawful K-9 unit acting under security protocol." For the first time, Lydia's mask cracked. Her hands trembled against the edge of the table, though she tried to hide it by straightening papers she didn't even have. I noticed her bag on the counter, a leather folder half unzipped, a set of laminated credentials peeking out. Diaz reached for them. "What's this?" She stiffened but didn't answer. The so-called documents had glossy seals, official-looking fonts, and a title that read, Agri-Home Solutions Emergency Response Division. The sheriff raised an eyebrow, tapped a number into his radio, and waited. A moment later, the response came back. No record of that division. No emergency inspection authority under state or county code. The silence that followed was heavy. Lydia swallowed, her eyes darting toward the window where Maggie's phone light was still glowing. The neighbors weren't just watching anymore. They were recording history. Rex shifted his weight slightly, tail low, but eyes sharp. He knew in his own way that the tide was turning. And here's the part that sticks with me. Instead of apologizing, instead of admitting she had no right to be in my house, Lydia doubled down. "You people don't understand," she snapped. "There are contamination risks. I had to act." But the words rang hollow. Diaz was already holding up her documents, pointing out the errors, the fake seals, the non-existent hotline number, the website that didn't work. Piece by piece, the facade crumbled. The neighbors outside caught it too. You could hear the low hum of voices picking up, disbelief spreading like wildfire. Maggie muttered loud enough for her camera to catch it. She forged government papers to break into his kitchen. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a trespass. This wasn't just Lydia being nosy or overstepping some HOA nonsense. This was something deeper, something systematic. Rex let out a quiet breath, almost like he knew the fight had only just begun. Because Lydia Pierce hadn't come to my kitchen by accident. She had a plan, and what we'd uncovered tonight was only the first crack in a much bigger scheme. You ever notice how some people can lie with a straight face, even when the truth is burning holes in their pocket? That was Lydia, sitting at my kitchen table with her chin tilted just so, like she still thought she could bluff her way through. But the problem was, this time the whole community was watching. Sheriff Diaz spread her laminated papers across the counter. Up close, they looked less official. The seal was off-center, the font too bold, almost cartoonish, and the so-called emergency contact number straight to a generic voicemail. Maggie Walsh's live stream was still rolling outside, her voice whispering updates into her phone. Yup, sheriff says it's fake, completely fake. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, keeping my words few. The cameras were speaking louder than anything I could say. Rex stayed near the doorway, eyes locked on Lydia, every muscle calm but alert. He wasn't there to intimidate, he was there to document. And he did, frame by frame. But Lydia, she pivoted like manipulators always do. Her voice softened, took on that patronizing sweetness. You have to understand, I was acting in the best interest of the community, she said, like she was lecturing a child. Chemical contamination doesn't wait for permission. Diaz didn't buy it. Neither did I, and neither did the neighbors watching from the porch. That's when Susan Miller appeared. She lived 2 farms over, an older woman with weathered hands and a spine bent from decades of lifting hay bales. She stepped up onto the porch, her voice carrying through the screen door. That's the same line she used on me 2 months ago. Every head turned. Susan held up a cloth bag, the kind you'd expect to see filled with chicken feed. Inside it was a spray bottle, clear liquid, faint chemical odor even from a few feet away. She made me think my farm was poisoning the groundwater, Susan said, voice trembling but steady enough to carry. Brought papers just like those, said I needed immediate inspections, monitoring, scared me half to death. Lydia shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting in her lap. For the first time, her control was slipping. Rex moved forward at my signal, nostrils flaring. His training kicked in like a switch flipping. Search, indicate, hold. He sniffed the bottle, then moved to the edges of the porch, nose tracing invisible trails only he could sense. When he reached the far post, he sat down hard, eyes on me, alert position. Evidence. Susan's voice cracked as she explained. I signed papers, gave her access. For weeks she came and went, said she was monitoring contamination, charged me for treatment supplies, made me think my farm was falling apart under my watch. Her weathered hands shook as she set the bottle down. 40 years of farming, and I believed her over my own nose. The neighbors murmured, the weight of her confession spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Maggie's livestream comments scrolled too fast to read, people calling out the scam, dissecting the evidence in real time. And here, where it got darker, because as Diaz listened, his expression hardened. This isn't just trespassing, he muttered. This is fraud, systematic. He glanced at Rex, who still sat rigid, eyes locked on the chemical bottle. And your partner just proved it. Lydia's mask cracked then, her voice rising sharp and shrill. You can't take her word over mine. She's confused, old, probably misremembering. None of this holds up in court. But even as she spoke, her bag slid off the counter. Papers scattered across the floor, credentials and forms that all bore the same fake seals. Maggie zoomed in on her live stream. Comments exploded, people recognized the formatting errors, the phony signatures, even the copy and paste seals. And I'll be honest with you, watching her scramble to gather those papers, cheeks flushed, hands shaking, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not even anger, just a quiet realization. This wasn't personal, it was business. Dirty, calculated business, and we were only scratching the surface. Because if Susan had been fooled, how many others had too? Rex let out a slow exhale, body steady, as if he already knew what was coming. His whole life had been missions, objectives, controlled environments where the enemy wore uniforms. But this was different. The enemy was a neighbor with a clipboard and a smile, and the battlefield was trust. The sheriff finally gathered up the papers, stuffed them into an evidence envelope. His voice was low but final. "Lydia Pierce, you're leaving this property tonight, but you'd better understand this investigation isn't stopping here." And just like that, the game changed. Because what had started as one woman trespassing in my kitchen had turned into something bigger. A web of lies, chemicals, forged papers, and fear. And the deeper we dug, the more dangerous it was about to get. You ever think you know your neighbors, only to realize you've been living beside strangers the whole time? That's the gut punch I felt 3 mornings later when I stepped out to grab the paper and found a bright red flyer stapled to my fence post. The headline screamed in block letters, "Dangerous military attack dog threatens agricultural safety." And right below it, a grainy photo of Rex cropped from his certification file. Someone had circled his tactical collar with a thick black marker and scrawled the word weapon across the picture. I stood there in the cool morning air, dew clinging to my boots, staring at that flyer like it had no right to exist. But it wasn't just on my fence. By the time I drove into town for supplies, I saw them everywhere, taped to mailboxes, tucked under windshield wipers, even slapped onto the bulletin board outside the feed store. Lydia hadn't licked her wounds and moved on. She'd gone on offense. At first I thought people would see through it. They'd watched the live stream. They'd seen Rex's discipline, his calm containment. But fear spreads faster than facts. At the town hall meeting that week, I felt at the moment Rex and I walked through the double doors. The old wood floor creaked under our boots. Rex's nails clicked in steady rhythm, his posture calm, his leash loose in my hand. But instead of nods and greetings, we were met with whispers. Glares, parents pulling their kids closer. Maggie whispered as I passed, "They've been talking all week, saying he's dangerous." On the stage, Lydia stood tall in a crimson blouse, hair neatly pinned, papers fanned out in her hand like a lawyer building her case. She didn't even flinch when Rex entered. In fact, she smiled, like she'd been waiting for the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth, carrying through the cracked speakers. "We have a problem in our community, a problem none of us asked for, a problem that could endanger our children, our livestock, even our peace of mind." She paused, letting the silence stretch, eyes sweeping the crowd. "That problem is a weaponized K-9 unit living among us." The words stung sharper than I expected. Weaponized, not trained, not certified, weaponized. I felt Rex shift beside me, sensing the tension, but he stayed steady, ears perked, eyes locked on me. Years of training had taught him to read the room, to hold his ground even when the world turned hostile. Lydia's theatrics continued. She waved flyers in the air, showed grainy photos on a projector someone had dragged out of the school basement. "These animals are trained for combat," she declared. "Not for peaceful farms, not for children playing near fence lines, not for livestock grazing freely." The crowd shifted, murmurs rippling like wind through tall grass. One man in the back called out, "What if he snaps? What if he goes after my cattle?" Another woman clutched her son's hand. "What happens when he mistakes a child for a threat?" And there it was, the seed had been planted. Fear dressed up as concern, spreading faster than wildfire on a dry August day. I stepped forward, my voice steady but low. "Rex has never attacked anyone. He's a professional. He contained a trespasser without laying a tooth on her. Everything's on tape." But Lydia's smirk told me she'd already won this round. "Tape can be edited," she countered, eyes glinting under the fluorescent lights. "But what about scratches on farm equipment? What about frightened children? What about the undeniable truth that this animal was trained to take down human beings in war zones?" Her words landed heavy. I could see it in the crowd, the doubt, the unease. People who had once waved at Rex during his evening patrols now looked at him like a loaded gun pointed in their direction. And the cruelest part? Rex didn't understand. He sat calmly, head high, tail low, waiting for his next command. All he knew was that his job was to protect me, this farm, this community, and here they were calling him a threat. The meeting ended with murmurs of investigation, evaluation, safety review. Bureaucratic words that boiled down to one thing: they were coming after Rex. When we stepped back out into the cool night air, the crickets chirping in the fields, I finally let my breath out. I knelt down, scratched Rex behind the ears, and whispered, "They don't know you, buddy, they don't know." He leaned into my hand, steady as ever. But as I looked out across the darkened street, seeing more flyers plastered on lampposts, one thought chilled me deeper than the night air. This wasn't just about discrediting Rex anymore. This was about destroying the only shield I had against Lydia's schemes. And she was just getting started. You ever wake up to silence that doesn't feel right? That's what hit me at 4 in the morning when Rex's low growl rumbled through the house. Not frantic, not panicked, just that steady vibration he only used when something wasn't where it should be. I threw on my jacket, boots unlaced, and stepped out into the night. The barn door stood wide open, moonlight spilling across the gravel. Fresh spray paint dripped down the old wood in red letters big enough to see from the road. Killer dog. The sight stopped me cold. For years, that barn had been the heartbeat of this farm, the place where tools leaned against walls worn smooth by my father's hands, where the smell of hay and oil lingered in the beams. And now it had been turned into a billboard for fear. Rex moved ahead of me, nose working the ground, body low and methodical. His training wasn't to panic or charge. It was to read the scene, track, catalog. He found tire tracks by the fence line, fresh footprints in the soft dirt, even a faint chemical residue where someone had lingered too long. He sat back on his haunches, eyes sharp, tail still. Alert. Evidence, always evidence. By sunrise, the phone started ringing. Anonymous complaints filed with the county about aggressive K-9 activity on my property. The language was precise, almost legal sounding. Words like unauthorized patrol operations and agricultural safety violations. It didn't sound like neighbors worried about barking. It sounded like paperwork written to stick. And sure enough, by mid-morning, county animal control showed up. 2 officers in khaki uniforms, clipboards in hand, their cruiser idling by the gate. Rex met them calmly, responding to every command I gave with mechanical precision. Sit, down, heel, hold. His obedience was flawless, the kind of performance you dream of in evaluations. But it didn't matter. The officers kept exchanging glances, jotting notes, circling words. One of them finally asked, "What about scratches on Maggie Walsh's plow equipment? She says your dog charged it." I frowned. Rex never leaves this property without me, and he's never damaged a thing. They showed me photos on a tablet. Fresh gouges across the paint of Maggie's machinery, deep, deliberate marks, not claw marks. I could see it plain as day. Metal tools had done that, not a dog, but to anyone who wanted to believe, it looked like evidence. And then came the video. Someone had taken footage from Rex's collar cam, spliced it together, stripped the audio, and slowed the frame rate to make it look like he was charging equipment during a containment drill. No handler's commands, no context, just a silent loop of a military-trained dog lunging forward. The officer shook his head, hard to ignore when neighbors are saying they're scared. I wanted to tear the tablet out of his hands, show him frame by frame how the metadata didn't line up, how the commands had been cut, how the timing was wrong. But I knew the truth. Propaganda doesn't need facts, it just needs repetition. That night at the feed store, people avoided me. Conversations died when I walked down the aisle. One man muttered under his breath as I passed, "Attack dogs don't belong on farms." Even the clerk, who'd known me since high school, cleared his throat and said, maybe shop earlier before the rush." His eyes flicked toward Rex, who was sitting calmly by my side, tail sweeping once across the floor. Not barking, not growling, just being. But the damage was spreading faster than I could stop it. Flyers multiplying. Online posts twisting facts into fear. edited clips spreading on farming forums with captions like "Military dog snaps under pressure." And through it all, Rex stayed steady. He didn't understand the accusations, didn't know that every calm patrol, every perfect response was being painted as proof of danger. He only knew his job: protect, contain, serve. I'll never forget the look in his eyes that week, sharp, focused, waiting for my next command, but behind it something softer: confusion, as if he could sense that the very people he'd been trained to protect were now turning against him. And maybe that's what cut deepest. Because the scratches, the spray paint, the edited footage, those were just tactics. But the whispers at the feed store, the glares at the town hall, the fear in neighbors' eyes, that was trust breaking. And once trust breaks in a small town, it's almost impossible to put back together. But I wasn't about to let them take Rex down with lies. Not after everything he'd done. Not after everything we'd built. Because if Lydia thought propaganda could break us, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. You ever see your best friend judged by people who don't even know him? That's what it felt like the morning animal control rolled up again, this time with clipboards, cameras, and 3 officials from the agricultural department in tow. The gravel crunched under their boots as they walked across my yard, their faces set in that practiced neutrality that already told me their minds were half made up. Rex was at my side, tail low, ears forward, posture calm. He'd been through more evaluations than most dogs see in a lifetime. Airports, bases, patrol yards overseas. But this was different. This wasn't about explosives or suspects. This was about whether my own community would accept him at all. The lead officer cleared his throat. We've had multiple complaints. Claims of aggressive patrols, livestock threats, unsafe behavior. We need to observe the animal and determine if his certification is valid in an agricultural setting. I nodded once, hiding the anger boiling in my gut. He's a trained K-9 unit. He'll show you. And he did. For 30 minutes, Rex performed every command with textbook precision. Track, indicate, hold, down, sit, heel. He even ignored a rooster strutting too close and a goat bleeding from the neighbor's pen. His discipline was flawless, like watching a machine calibrated for perfection. But the officials weren't nodding in approval. They were scribbling, frowning, asking loaded questions. What if a child ran at him suddenly? What happens if a civilian misinterprets his posture? Are you confident this animal can distinguish between a trespasser and an inspector? I wanted to shout that he already had, that Lydia's bluff had been contained without a single snap of teeth. But I could see where this was going. They weren't looking for proof of discipline. They were looking for justification to write him off. When the evaluation ended, Rex sat calmly at my side, tongue lolling slightly, completely unaware his very existence was on trial. The officials gathered in a circle, their voices low but sharp. One of them glanced back at me with the kind of look you give someone you've already decided against. And then Lydia showed up. Her car rolled to a stop at the edge of the property, that same smug smile plastered across her face. She stepped out in crisp white slacks, holding a stack of folders like a trophy. "I have additional documentation," she announced, striding right up as though she were part of the investigation. Diaz wasn't there this time to block her. The officials actually let her hand over the papers. She spun her story again: community safety, unauthorized security operations, weaponized animals in farming districts. Her words dripped with that practiced authority, the kind that feeds on fear. And the worst part, some of the officials nodded along. The crowd that had gathered at the fence line muttered, too, parents whispering about children, farmers muttering about livestock. Maggie stood with her phone out again, but this time fewer people were tuning in. Fear was louder than facts now. One of the officials finally spoke. "Given the volume of complaints, we'll need to review this further. In the meantime, the animal should refrain from participating in community gatherings." Community gatherings. They meant town halls, supply markets, meetings. They meant isolation. I looked down at Rex, who was sitting steady, ears flicked toward the voices, waiting for me to give the next order. He didn't know what they were saying. Didn't know they were turning his discipline into danger, his training into threat. He only knew that his job was to protect me, protect this farm, protect the people who were now calling him a killer. And for the first time, I felt his confusion sink into me. His tail didn't wag when we walked back to the porch. His eyes searched mine as if to ask, did I do something wrong? I knelt down, scratched behind his ears, and whispered, no, buddy, you did everything right. They're the ones who don't see it. But deep down, I knew Lydia's campaign was working. The barn graffiti, the flyers, the fake evidence, it had all been building to this moment. A manufactured consensus that Rex didn't belong here. And the cruelest thought of all, if she could twist the truth enough to turn my neighbors against him, what else was she planning next? You ever feel like the walls are closing in, not from strangers, but from the very people you thought would stand with you? That's what the next few weeks felt like. Every corner I turned in town, there were whispers. Every time I pulled into the feed store, eyes followed me. The flyers had done their work. The propaganda had sunk deep. And Rex, he carried himself steady, calm as always, but I could feel the shift in him too. He knew the stares weren't admiration anymore. They were suspicion. Then one night, just as the cicadas were screaming their summer chorus, Susan Miller showed up again. This time, she wasn't empty-handed. She laid a cloth bag on my porch rail, same as before, but heavier. When she pulled it open, I saw 3 identical spray bottles, each labeled with cheap printed stickers. Agri-Home Solutions Contamination Test Kit. Her hands shook as she explained. I started keeping them after I realized what she'd done to me, thought maybe I was crazy, thought maybe it was my fault I fell for it. But then I heard the same story from 2 other farmers last week. Same bottles, same fake inspections. Rex sniffed the bottles carefully, nose twitching in that methodical pattern that only came from years of training. He moved to the edge of the porch, scanned the yard, then sat hard by the fence. His signal. Fresh traces of the same chemicals had been deployed near my property too. And that's when the pattern clicked into place. It wasn't just Lydia throwing her weight around as HOA president. This was bigger, systematic. These chemicals weren't dangerous, not to crops, not to livestock. But they smelled dangerous. They triggered panic. And if you pair panic with forged credentials and a loud enough voice, you could walk onto anyone's property and make them believe they were in violation of codes that didn't even exist. I felt my gut knot. How many farms had already fallen victim to this? How many elderly owners had signed papers in fear like Susan? The next morning, as if Lydia knew she was losing ground, the propaganda escalated. Flyers weren't enough anymore. Someone had slipped an envelope into my mailbox. Inside was a typed letter, clean formatting, no names signed at the bottom. Military dogs don't belong on farms. Training accidents happen. Community safety must come first. Retire him before something worse happens. The words looked polite, but the message was clear. This was a threat. Rex sniffed the paper, then sneezed sharply. His nose picked up something mine never could, the same artificial compound Susan had brought me. Lydia was marking her territory again, leaving her chemical fingerprints even on her intimidation letters. I was at my limit. That night, Sheriff Diaz came by, his cruiser headlights sweeping across the porch. He leaned against the rail, arms crossed, and let out a long sigh. She's not working alone. We've been hearing whispers in neighboring counties, same tricks, same bogus inspections. This isn't just HOA nonsense anymore. This is organized fraud. Rex stood nearby, ears flicked forward as if he understood every word. Diaz scratched the back of his neck. You know what that means? We can't handle this with county resources. We need federal investigators, and they'll need Rex. For a moment, the air seemed to still. Federal, not just local drama anymore, a real investigation, a mission. I glanced at Rex. His tail swept once across the porch boards. He didn't understand the word federal, but he understood the tone. Mission, objective, purpose. His training came alive in that instant. Within days, federal agricultural investigators arrived in unmarked trucks. Not suits, not city men, but practical folks with weathered boots and guarded eyes. They didn't treat Rex like a threat. They treated him like an asset. They asked him to work. And he did. For hours, Rex tracked chemical signatures across my property, mapping invisible trails that led to fence posts. Equipment, even the edge of the gravel road where Lydia's car had pulled in nights before. His nose connected the dots human eyes couldn't. Every sit, every pause, every sharp turn of his head was logged into tactical software running live on their tablets. Susan stood off to the side, watching with her arms folded. At one point she said quietly, "Your dog's doing what none of us could, proving this wasn't just paranoia, proving we were played." The evidence built faster than even I expected. Bottle after bottle of those fake chemical sprays matched. GPS logs from Rex's collar mapped the same contamination trails across multiple farms. It wasn't just my word against Lydia's anymore. It was data, hard evidence. But Lydia wasn't backing down. At the next town hall, she strode to the podium like she owned it, wearing a tailored blazer and clutching a thick binder. She spoke with the confidence of someone who thought volume could erase truth. This man is deploying a weaponized animal against civilian farmers. Children are scared. Livestock are at risk. Our community is under siege by military tactics that don't belong here. The words twisted like knives. The officials sat stiff in their folding chairs, taking notes. The crowd muttered, fear spreading like rot through old wood. And then, right in the middle of her speech, Rex did something I'll never forget. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood, calm and steady, and turned his head toward the side door. Seconds later, 2 federal agents walked in, their badges flashing under the fluorescent light. The room went dead silent. They didn't waste time. They laid out evidence. Photos, chemical analyses, fake credentials, and Rex's tracking logs, time-stamped and verified. Lydia's smile faltered for the first time. The federal agent's voice was cool and sharp. "This isn't about a dog. This is about fraud, and we have reason to believe this operation extends far beyond this town." The crowd shifted, whispers breaking out. Fear turned to confusion. Confusion turned to anger, but not at Rex, at her. For the first time, the tide was turning. I looked down at Rex, who sat calmly at my side, eyes bright, ears forward, every line of his body saying the same thing he always did. Mission accepted. And in that moment, I knew the fight wasn't just about saving him anymore. It was about saving every farm she'd touched with her lies. And she was about to find out that when you go up against a K-9 unit, you don't just fight the handler. You fight the truth. You ever have one of those moments where everything you've been fighting for, all the sleepless nights, all the fear, all the whispers behind your back, suddenly flips and the truth finally gets its day? That's what the morning of the operation felt like. The air was cool, mist rolling low across the fields, roosters crowing somewhere off in the distance. I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee gone cold, Rex at my feet, his ears twitching at every sound. He didn't know the full weight of what was coming, but he felt it. He always did. His posture was different, more alert, more patient, like he'd slipped back into his old mission mode. Federal investigators had briefed me the night before. They'd traced Lydia's operation across multiple states. Elderly farmers pressured into signing fraudulent inspection agreements, chemical sprays planted to mimic contamination, fabricated documents that gave her emergency powers she never had. What started in my kitchen had unraveled into a 7-state fraud network. And today, they were going to end it. Rex's tactical collar was live, transmitting data straight to their command center. His mission: observe, track, document. Mine: stay out of the way and let him do what he was trained to do. By mid-morning, Lydia's car rolled down the back road, just like analysts predicted. She thought I was gone, off at a farm conference. That's how they wanted it. The driveway was quiet, the house still. Only Rex knew the truth, crouched low behind the porch railing, his collar cam already rolling. I watched from a distance, heart pounding as Lydia popped her trunk and pulled out those same spray bottles, the same testing kits she'd used to terrify Susan Miller and half the county. She moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this dozens of times before. Step by step, she scattered her fake evidence, spraying fence posts, dabbing liquid near the barn, scribbling in a clipboard as though it all carried weight. But this time, every move was being documented. Rex tracked her silently, nose twitching, recording chemical signatures as he followed her invisible trail. His ears flicked forward, his tail low. No bark, no growl, just discipline. When she reached the porch, papers in hand, Rex didn't budge. He waited. His training said to observe until commanded otherwise. And the command came not from me, but through the earpiece of the federal team stationed just down the road. Proceed. Within seconds, black SUVs rolled in, tires spitting gravel. Agents fanned out in formation, voices sharp and direct. Federal agents, step away from the property. Lydia froze, her fake documents clutched tight against her chest. For a heartbeat, she looked around like she still believed she could talk her way out. But then she saw the badges. And then she saw Rex's collar cam blinking red, broadcasting every second of her staged performance. Her voice cracked. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," one of the agents cut in, shoving a warrant toward her. "This is fraud, organized, systematic fraud, and we have it all on tape." Rex shifted slightly, eyes locked on her, steady as stone. The camera caught her panic, the twitch of her mouth, the dart of her eyes, the collapse of her confidence as she realized her audience wasn't neighbors anymore. It was federal prosecutors. When they cuffed her, the crowd that had gathered along the fence line was silent. No cheers, no jeers, just the heavy weight of realization. For weeks, they'd doubted me. For weeks, they'd treated Rex like a weapon, like a danger to their families. And now, in one swift motion, they saw the truth. Susan Miller stood near the front, her hands clasped tight. Tears streaked her weathered face, but there was pride in her eyes. Pride that she hadn't been crazy, pride that she hadn't been alone. Maggie Walsh whispered into her phone for her live stream audience. "She's done. They caught everything." By evening, Lydia Pierce was in custody, her so-called Agri-Home Solutions exposed as nothing more than a scam front. Investigators confirmed what Rex had already proven: fake chemicals, fake authority, fake inspections. And all of it held together by fear. But fear only works until the evidence piles too high to ignore. The weeks that followed were different. The same neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid Rex now came up the drive with sheepish smiles and fresh pies. Kids who had once whispered, "Killer dog," under their breath now tugged their parents' sleeves, asking if they could see him work. At the community center, the very hall where Lydia had stood and smeared his name, Rex was given official recognition. An agricultural security K-9, trained, disciplined, and honored for protecting not just my farm, but dozens of others. I'll never forget the look in his eyes that day, calm, steady, but with a flicker of something I hadn't seen in weeks. Pride. He understood in his way that the mission had been completed, that the people who once doubted him now stood beside him. Lydia, meanwhile, faced federal charges: fraud across state lines, forgery, elder exploitation. Her sentence would be measured not in fines, but in years, and every piece of evidence that nailed her down came from Rex's discipline, his recordings, his nose for truth. Sometimes the strongest justice doesn't come from shouting. It comes from patience, from discipline, from proof. And as I sit here now on this same porch, the evening sun painting the fields gold, Rex rests at my feet. His ears twitch at the sound of a creaking gate down the road, but he doesn't rise. Not tonight. Not with peace finally settling in. You know, people ask me sometimes what the lesson is in all this. Why tell this story at all? And I think the answer is simple. Because sometimes the enemy isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it wears a smile, flashes a paper badge, and calls itself authority. Sometimes it makes you doubt yourself, doubt your neighbors, doubt the very ground you stand on. But truth, real truth, doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need flyers or propaganda. It just needs discipline, documentation, steadiness. Rex taught me that. And if you've listened this far, maybe you'll take it with you too. Stay sharp, keep your cameras rolling, guard your peace. Because you never know when someone's going to come stomping through your kitchen, thinking they can own what isn't theirs. And if they do, well, let's just hope you've got a partner as steady as Rex waiting for them. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.